In the quiet little town of Maplewood, tucked between rolling green hills and thick forests, there lived a man who was known for two things: his skill with machines and his big heart. This man owned a small auto repair shop that had been in his family for decades. The shop wasn't fancy, just a weathered building with rust-streaked walls and a sign that read, "Thompson's Garage," hanging crookedly above the entrance. But inside, it was always buzzing with activity. People from all over town brought their cars here because they knew this mechanic didn't just fix vehicles. He fixed problems. One chilly autumn afternoon, as the golden sunlight filtered through the trees and painted long shadows on the ground, the mechanic was wiping grease off his hands after finishing up a tough job. He glanced at the clock. It was almost closing time. Just as he started packing away his tools, something caught his eye. Outside, near the edge of the parking lot, sat a young boy in a wheelchair with his mom standing beside him. They looked lost, like they weren't sure if they should even approach. The boy couldn't have been more than 8 years old. His thin arms rested limply on the armrests of the wheelchair, and his legs were strapped into place with worn-out supports. The chair itself was in bad shape. One of its wheels wobbled dangerously, making it look like it might collapse at any moment. The seat cushion was torn, exposing lumpy foam underneath. It was clear that the chair had seen better days but was now barely holding together. The mechanic stepped outside, curious about what had brought them to his garage. As he got closer, the boy's mother turned to him with a mix of hope and desperation in her eyes. She introduced herself softly and explained their situation. Her son had cerebral palsy, she said, which meant he relied completely on the wheelchair to move around. Unfortunately, the chair had broken down again, and they didn't have the money to get it repaired or replaced. Insurance wouldn't cover it either, leaving them stuck. "We've tried everywhere," she added, her voice trembling slightly. "But no one can help us without charging hundreds of dollars we simply don't have." The mechanic listened quietly, nodding every now and then. He could see how much this meant to her, not just the practical need for a working wheelchair, but also the emotional toll it took. Every time the chair broke, it felt like another obstacle they had to face alone. And the boy, he sat silently, looking down at his lap, probably used to hearing adults talk about him as though he weren't there. There was a sadness in his expression that tugged at the mechanic's heartstrings. Without hesitation, the mechanic smiled warmly and told her, "Don't worry. I'll take care of it." She blinked, surprised by his offer. "Really? You do that?" "Of course," he replied, shrugging as if it were nothing. "It's just a few parts and some elbow grease. Bring it inside tomorrow morning and I'll see what I can do." The relief on her face was immediate. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she thanked him repeatedly, promising to bring the wheelchair back first thing the next day. The mechanic waved off her gratitude, insisting that anyone would do the same thing. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would go out of their way to help strangers, especially when there was no profit in it. For him, though, it was second nature. Helping people was just what he did. True to his word, the mechanic spent the next couple of days working tirelessly on the wheelchair. After closing the shop each evening, he stayed late into the night tinkering with the damaged parts. He scavenged spare components from his collection of odds and ends, piecing together solutions until the chair was as good as new. When the wheel finally stopped wobbling and the seat was patched up snugly, he leaned back with a satisfied grin. It wasn't perfect. It still showed signs of wear and tear, but it was sturdy, enough to last a while longer. When the boy and his mother returned to pick it up, the mechanic greeted them with a wide smile. Handing over the freshly repaired wheelchair, he watched as the boy tested it out, rolling forward smoothly for the first time in weeks. The child's face lit up with pure joy, and his mother hugged the mechanic tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You've done so much for us," she whispered. "I don't know how to thank you." The mechanic chuckled, embarrassed by the attention. "Just pay it forward someday," he said simply. "That's all the thanks I need." What neither of them realized at that moment was that this simple act of kindness would set off a chain reaction far beyond anything they could have imagined. Little did the mechanic know, his decision to help a struggling family would soon lead to opportunities that would change his life and countless others forever. The mechanic went back to his usual routine after fixing the wheelchair, thinking nothing more of it. Life in Maplewood was predictable. Cars came in broken, he fixed them, and people left happy. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest. And he took pride in knowing he made a difference, even if it was just one car or one person at a time. He didn't expect anything extraordinary to come from helping the boy and his mom. To him, it was just another day, another chance to lend a hand where it was needed. But fate had other plans. A few days later, as the mechanic was elbow-deep in oil trying to figure out why an old truck refused to start, a sleek black car pulled into the driveway of his shop. It was the kind of vehicle you didn't see often in Maplewood, a shiny, expensive sedan that looked completely out of place among the dusty trucks and beat-up sedans parked outside his garage. The mechanic wiped his hands on a rag and stepped out to greet the visitor, curious about what someone driving such a fancy car could possibly want with him. The door opened, and out stepped a tall man dressed in a sharp suit. His polished shoes gleamed under the sunlight, and his sunglasses reflected the mechanic's puzzled expression. The man removed his glasses, revealing piercing eyes that seemed to scan the surroundings before settling on the mechanic. He extended a hand and introduced himself with a warm smile. "I'm here to thank you," the man said simply, his voice calm but commanding. The mechanic frowned, unsure of what the stranger was talking about. "Thank me? For what?" "For fixing my nephew's wheelchair," the man replied. The mechanic's eyes widened in surprise. "Your nephew?" he asked, piecing things together. So the boy and his mom hadn't mentioned that they were related. To someone like this, the man standing before him radiated success and authority, the kind of person who probably lived in a world far removed from the small-town struggles of Maplewood. "Yes," the man confirmed. "I heard about what you did for them. My sister told me everything, how you repaired the wheelchair without asking for anything in return. I wanted to come here personally to express my gratitude." The mechanic shrugged, still feeling a bit uncomfortable with all the attention. It was no big deal. Anyone would have done the same. The man chuckled softly. "You'd be surprised how many people wouldn't. That's why I'm here. You didn't just fix a wheelchair, you gave my nephew a sense of freedom, a chance to move around without constantly worrying about falling apart. And you did it out of pure kindness. That's rare these days." The mechanic shifted awkwardly, not used to being praised so openly. "Well, I'm glad I could help. But really, it wasn't anything special." The man studied him for a moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. He handed it over with a thoughtful expression. "Take this. If you ever need anything or if you're interested in something bigger, I'd love to talk." The mechanic glanced at the card. It was simple but elegant, with the name of a company embossed in bold letters, Reed Innovations.
Below it was
a title, CEO. The mechanic's eyebrows shot up. This guy wasn't just successful. He was very successful. Reed Innovations was a name he'd heard before, though he couldn't quite place where. Something about technology and innovation, maybe? "I appreciate the gesture," the mechanic said slowly, handing the card back. "But I'm just a small-town guy. I doubt there's much I can offer to someone like you." The man smiled knowingly. "Don't sell yourself short. Sometimes the most valuable skills aren't the flashy ones. They're the practical, hands-on abilities that make real change happen." You have a gift, and I think it could do a lot of good in ways you might not expect. The mechanic hesitated. He wasn't sure what to say. The idea of leaving Maplewood, of stepping into a world he knew nothing about, felt overwhelming. But there was something about the man's sincerity that struck a chord deep within him. Maybe it was the way he spoke with genuine admiration, or maybe it was the spark of curiosity, ignited by the possibility of doing something greater than himself. Before the mechanic could respond further, the man continued, "Think about it. No pressure. Just know that opportunities like this don't come around often, and when they do, it's worth considering." With that, the man shook the mechanic's hand once more, climbed back into his sleek car, and drove off, leaving behind a trail of questions swirling in the mechanic's mind. Over the next few days, the mechanic found himself replaying the conversation over and over again. Who was this man? What exactly was he offering? And why did it feel like his life was standing on the edge of something monumental? He shared the story with a few close friends, seeking their advice. Some encouraged him to take the leap, saying it sounded like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Others warned him to be cautious, reminding him that big promises sometimes came with hidden strings attached. But deep down, the mechanic knew one thing for certain. He couldn't ignore the possibility. Not when it felt like the universe was nudging him towards something bigger. Finally, after days of deliberation, he made up his mind. He picked up the phone and dialed the number on the business card. When the man answered, his tone was friendly and welcoming, as if he'd been expecting the call. "I've thought about it," the mechanic said, his voice steady despite the nerves bubbling inside him. "And I'm willing to hear you out. Tell me more about what you have in mind." The man's response was enthusiastic. "Great. I'll send a car for you tomorrow morning. We'll discuss everything in detail. Trust me, you won't regret this." The mechanic hung up the phone, his heart racing. He wasn't sure what lay ahead, but one thing was clear. His life was about to change in ways he never imagined. The next morning, true to his word, a black car arrived at the mechanic's shop. As he locked up for the day and climbed into the back seat, he felt a strange mix of excitement and apprehension. The car glided smoothly through the streets of Maplewood, past familiar landmarks, the diner where he grabbed coffee every morning, the park where kids played baseball, the hardware store where he bought tools. Each sight felt like a goodbye, though he wasn't sure if he was ready to leave them behind. Eventually, the car pulled onto a private airstrip on the outskirts of town. Waiting there was a gleaming private jet, its engines humming softly as it prepared for takeoff. The mechanic stared at it in awe, unable to believe this was really happening. A member of the crew greeted him warmly and escorted him aboard, where plush leather seats and polished wood accents awaited as the plane soared into the sky. The mechanic gazed out the window at the shrinking landscape below. Maplewood disappeared into the horizon, replaced by vast stretches of clouds and endless blue skies. For the first time in his life, he felt truly untethered, free from the confines of his small-town existence, yet uncertain of where this journey would lead. Little did he know, the adventure was only beginning. The private jet touched down on a sleek runway in Silicon Valley, and for the mechanic, it felt like stepping into another world. The air here was different, charged with energy, buzzing with ambition. As he stepped off the plane, he was greeted by the same tall man who had visited his shop days earlier. This time, though, the man wasn't alone. A small team of professionals stood nearby, holding tablets and notebooks, ready to guide him through what would soon become his new reality. "Welcome to Reed Innovations," the man said warmly, extending a hand. "I hope the flight wasn't too overwhelming." The mechanic shook his head, still trying to process everything. "It's a lot to take in," he admitted. glancing around at the sprawling campus ahead of them. Glass buildings stretched toward the sky, reflecting the sunlight like mirrors. People bustled about, some in suits, others in casual techwear, all moving with purpose. It was a far cry from the quiet streets of Maplewood. The man chuckled. "Don't worry, you'll get used to it. Let me show you around." They started with a tour of the facility. The mechanic was introduced to labs filled with cutting-edge technology robots that moved with precision, 3D printers crafting intricate parts layer by layer, and walls lined with prototypes of devices he couldn't even begin to understand. Everywhere he looked, there was innovation happening, ideas being turned into reality. But as fascinating as it all was, the mechanic couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong here. After all, what could a guy who fixed cars in a small-town garage possibly contribute to a place like this? His doubts must have shown on his face because the man stopped mid-tour and turned to him. "You're probably wondering why I brought you here," he said. "Let me explain." He led the mechanic into a conference room where a large screen displayed images of mobility devices, wheelchairs, walkers, prosthetics, all designed to help people with disabilities live fuller lives. At Reed Innovations, we focus on creating solutions that empower people, the man explained, but we've hit a roadblock. Our designs are advanced, but they're also expensive. We want to make these technologies accessible to everyone, not just those who can afford them. That's where you come in. The mechanic blinked, confused. "Me? How?" "You've got something most engineers don't," the man replied. "Practical experience. You know how things break and how to fix them in ways that are cost-effective and reliable. That's exactly what we need if we're going to design affordable mobility solutions for families like your nephew's." The mechanic's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected this. Sure, he'd helped repair one wheelchair, but designing products that could change lives on a larger scale? It seemed impossible. Yet, as the man spoke, the mechanic began to see the potential. Maybe his skills weren't so ordinary after all. Maybe they could be used for something bigger. Over the next few weeks, the mechanic settled into his new role. At first, it was overwhelming. The language everyone used, terms like AI integration and adaptive algorithms, felt foreign to him. The pace was relentless, with meetings scheduled back-to-back and deadlines looming constantly. But the team was patient. They recognized his value and encouraged him to share his insights, no matter how unconventional they might seem. One day, during a brainstorming session, the mechanic suggested using modular components in their designs. If something breaks, people should be able to replace just that part instead of buying an entirely new device, he explained. It's cheaper and easier to maintain. The room fell silent for a moment before erupting into excited chatter. Someone scribbled notes furiously, while another person started sketching diagrams based on his idea. The mechanic watched in amazement as his suggestion sparked a wave of creativity among the team. For the first time, he realized he did have something unique to offer, a perspective shaped by years of solving real-world problems with limited resources. As the project progressed, the mechanic found himself growing more confident. He collaborated closely with engineers, designers, and programmers, learning from them while teaching them about durability, simplicity, and practicality. Together, they worked tirelessly to create a line of adaptive wheelchairs that were not only functional, but also customizable. Each chair could be tailored to fit the specific needs of its user, whether it was adjusting the height, adding voice controls, or incorporating sensors to detect obstacles. Despite the long hours and occasional setbacks, the mechanic felt alive in a way he never had before. Every challenge they overcame brought them closer to their goal, and every breakthrough reminded him why he'd taken this leap of faith. He thought often about the boy and his mother back in Maple World, their gratitude, Their relief, and it fueled his determination to succeed. Months passed, and finally, the day arrived when the team unveiled their prototype. It was sleek yet sturdy, packed with features that made it both innovative and user-friendly. The mechanic stood beside the man who had brought him here, watching as testers wheeled the chair around the lab. Their faces lit up with excitement as they discovered its capabilities. One tester, a teenager with cerebral palsy, grinned broadly as she navigated tight corners with ease. "This is amazing," she said. "I've never had a chair that feels like it was made just for me." The mechanic's chest swelled with pride. This was it, the culmination of months of hard work, late nights, and countless cups of coffee. They had done it. They had created something that could truly make a difference, but the journey wasn't over yet. With the prototype complete, the next step was production. The company planned to launch the product globally, partnering with hospitals, schools, and nonprofits to ensure it reached those who needed it most. The mechanic knew this was just the beginning. There were still challenges ahead: scaling production, keeping costs low, navigating regulations, but he was ready. More than ready. As he walked out of the lab that evening, the sun setting behind the glass buildings, the mechanic paused to take it all in. From a small-town garage to the heart of Silicon Valley, his life had transformed in ways he never could have imagined. And yet, at its core, nothing had changed. He was still doing what he'd always done, fixing what was broken, making life a little easier for those who needed it most. He smiled to himself, thinking about the boy and his mother. Somewhere out there, someone else was getting the chance to move freely, to explore the world without limits. And knowing that, that was worth everything. The launch of the adaptive wheelchair line was nothing short of a sensation. When Reed Innovations unveiled the product to the world, it didn't take long for the news to spread like wildfire. Social media buzzed with videos of kids zipping around in their new chairs, parents sharing heartfelt stories of how these devices had changed their families' lives, and medical professionals praising the innovation as a game-changer in assistive technology. The mechanic, who had once spent his days fixing cars in a small-town garage, found himself at the center of it all. At first, he tried to stay out of the spotlight. He wasn't comfortable being the face of anything, let alone a global movement. But the company insisted that his story be shared. After all, it was his hands-on expertise and practical mindset that had helped shape the project into what it was. So, reluctantly, he agreed to give interviews, attend conferences, and speak about the journey that led him from Maplewood to Silicon Valley. Each time he told his story, people were captivated, not just by the technical details of the wheelchairs, but by the human element behind them. They wanted to know why he had decided to help a stranger's child without expecting anything in return. What drove him to leave behind everything familiar and take such a monumental leap? And every time, the mechanic gave the same answer. It wasn't about me, it was about doing what felt right. But as much as he tried to downplay his role, the public saw him differently. To them, he wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was a symbol of hope, proof that kindness could lead to extraordinary outcomes. Letters poured in from all over the world, notes of gratitude, requests for advice, and even drawings from children who dreamed of one day using the chairs themselves. One letter, written by a young girl with cerebral palsy, stood out to him. She described how she used to feel trapped in her old chair, unable to keep up with her friends. Now, thanks to the new design, she could finally join in on games during recess. "You made my life better," she wrote. "Thank you for seeing us." Reading those words brought tears to his eyes. For so long, he'd thought of himself as just an ordinary guy doing ordinary things. But now, he realized that sometimes ordinary actions could have an extraordinary impact. That realization stayed with him, fueling his determination to keep pushing forward. As the months went by, adaptive wheelchair program expanded rapidly. Production facilities opened in multiple countries, ensuring that the chairs were available to families regardless of where they lived. Partnerships were formed with hospitals and schools, allowing the company to distribute the devices to those who needed them most. Nonprofits jumped on board, helping cover costs for families who couldn't afford even the reduced price. Every step of the way, the mechanic remained deeply involved, overseeing quality control, troubleshooting issues, and constantly looking for ways to improve the designs. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, he found himself reflecting on how far he'd come. Sitting alone in his apartment, a modern space filled with gadgets he still didn't fully understand, he scrolled through photos on his phone. There were pictures of him standing beside prototypes in the lab, shaking hands with engineers, and posing awkwardly in front of cameras. But the ones that meant the most were the candid shots of kids using the wheelchairs. Their smiles said more than any speech or press release ever could. He thought back to the boy and his mother, the ones who had started it all. He hadn't seen them since that day in Maplewood when he handed over the repaired wheelchair. He wondered how they were doing, whether the boy was still using the chair he'd fixed or if he'd upgraded to one of the newer models. Part of him hoped they were okay, thriving even. Another part wished he could see them again, just to say, "Thank you for unknowingly setting this incredible chain of events in motion." His musings were interrupted by a knock at the door. Opening it, he was surprised to find the tall man, the CEO of Reed Innovations, standing there with a grin. "Got a minute?" the man asked. "Sure," the mechanic replied, stepping aside to let him in. The man took a seat on the couch, gesturing for the mechanic to join him. "I just wanted to check in," he said. "How are you holding up?" "All this attention must be overwhelming." The mechanic shrugged. "It's different. I never expected any of this when I fixed that first chair. But honestly, I'm grateful. Seeing the difference we're making, it's worth it." The man nodded approvingly. "That's good to hear. Because there's something else I want to talk to you about." Curiosity piqued. The mechanic leaned forward. "What is it?" "We've been getting feedback from users," the man began. "And while the chairs are working well, some parents are asking for more customization options. Things like color schemes, personalized decals, maybe even built-in entertainment systems for long trips. We think it's a great idea, but we need someone to lead the initiative. Someone who understands both functionality and personalization." The mechanic raised an eyebrow. "Are you asking me?" "I am," the man confirmed. "You've proven you can bridge the gap between engineering and real-world needs. This is your chance to take things to the next level." For a moment, the mechanic hesitated. He'd already taken on so much responsibility, and the thought of adding another layer felt daunting. But then he imagined the joy on a child's face when they received a chair that wasn't just functional but also uniquely theirs. A chair that reflected their personality, their interests, their dreams. How could he say no to that? "I'll do it," he said finally, a smile spreading across his face. The man clapped him on the shoulder. "Knew you'd say that. You won't regret it." True to his word, the mechanic threw himself into the new project with the same passion and dedication he'd shown before. He worked closely with designers to develop customizable features, testing each addition rigorously to ensure it didn't compromise the chair's durability or performance. Colors, patterns, decals even. Bluetooth speakers and tablet holders all became part of the lineup. Each option was carefully chosen to balance fun with practicality, ensuring that the chairs remained accessible to everyone. When the updated models hit the market, the response was overwhelming. Parents loved the ability to personalize the chairs, while kids reveled in having something that truly felt like their own. Social media lit up again, this time with photos of vibrant, eye-catching wheelchairs decorated with superheroes, animals, and favorite sports teams. One viral post featured a young boy dressed as Spider-Man, his chair painted to match his costume. The caption read simply, "Now I can swing anywhere." Through it all, the mechanic continued to visit Maplewood whenever he could. Though he now lived in Silicon Valley, the town would always be home. During his visits, he made a point to stop by local schools and community centers, sharing his story with kids and encouraging them to pursue their passions. He brought along samples of the wheelchairs, letting the children test them out and ask questions. Some kids were curious about how the chairs worked. Others just wanted to race each other down the hallway. Either way, the mechanic loved seeing their excitement. On one such trip, he ran into the boy and his mother again. They were at a charity event hosted by Reed Innovations, which had donated several chairs to local families in need. When the mechanic spotted them, his heart swelled with emotion. The boy was older now, taller, and more confident. He navigated his chair effortlessly, chatting animatedly with friends nearby. His mother looked happier too, her shoulders relaxed, her smile genuine. She approached the mechanic, tears glistening in her eyes. "We heard about everything you've done," she said softly. "Thank you for everything. You've given so many families hope." The mechanic shook his head, embarrassed by the praise. "I didn't do it alone. None of this would have happened without people like you trusting me enough to try." Later that evening, as he watched the boy play with his friends, the mechanic felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was why he'd left Maplewood, why he'd embraced the challenges and uncertainties of a new life. It wasn't about fame or success. It was about creating opportunities for others to live fuller, freer lives. And as long as he could continue doing that, he knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. The mechanic's journey had come full circle. From the moment he fixed that old wobbly wheelchair in his garage, to standing amidst a sea of smiling children racing around in custom-designed chairs, he realized how much life could change when you simply chose to help someone in need. But this wasn't the end of the road. It was just the beginning of something bigger. As the adaptive wheelchair program grew, so did the mechanic's vision. He knew they were making a difference, but he also understood there was still so much more to do. Not every family who needed assistance could afford even the discounted prices of the new wheel chains. Some lived in remote areas where distribution networks hadn't reached yet. Others faced unique challenges that required specialized solutions no one had thought of before. The mechanic couldn't shake the feeling that his work wasn't done. Not by a long shot. One evening, while sitting on the balcony of his apartment overlooking the city lights of Silicon Valley, he picked up his phone and scrolled through photos from recent events. There was a picture of a little girl beaming as she showed off her pink and purple chair decorated with butterflies. Another showed a teenager giving a thumbs up as he spun circles in his sports-themed model. These images weren't just snapshots, they were reminders of why he got out of bed every morning. But then he came across a photo he hadn't seen in months. The boy and his mother from Maplewood. It was taken on the day he handed over the repaired wheelchair outside his shop. The boy looked shy, almost hesitant, as if unsure whether to trust the stranger promising to fix his chair. That image struck a chord deep within him. It reminded him of where it all started, a simple act of kindness born out of compassion. And suddenly, an idea sparked in his mind. The next morning, the mechanic walked into Reed Innovations with purpose. He called a meeting with the leadership team and pitched a bold plan: create a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing free or low-cost mobility devices to families in underserved communities. The company would supply the resources, and the mechanic would oversee operations, ensuring the mission stayed true to its roots, helping those who needed it most without expecting anything in return. To his relief, The proposal was met with enthusiasm. The CEO, the same man who had first approached him at his garage, was the first to support the idea. "This is exactly what we've been building toward," he said. "Let's make it happen." And so, Wheels of Hope was born. Nonprofit quickly gained traction. With funding from Reed Innovations and donations from individuals inspired by the mechanic's story, Wheels of Hope began distributing adaptive wheelchairs to families around the world. They partnered with hospitals, schools, and local organizations to identify those in need and ensure the devices reach them efficiently. For families struggling to make ends meet, receiving a wheelchair meant more than just mobility, it meant independence, dignity, and hope for a brighter future. But the mechanic didn't stop there. He wanted to inspire others to follow in his footsteps, to see that even small acts of kindness could lead to big changes. So, he launched a mentorship program aimed at teaching young people practical skills like mechanics, engineering, and problem solving. Every summer, kids from Maplewood and neighboring towns gathered at his old garage, now converted into a community workshop. There, they learned how to take apart engines, build prototypes, and think creatively about solving real-world problems. Many of these kids, it was their first exposure to hands-on learning. Some discovered hidden talents. Others found confidence they never knew they had. One boy, barely 12 years old, surprised everyone by designing a lightweight attachment for walkers that made them easier to carry. When the mechanic praised him for his ingenuity, the boy grinned and said, "If you can change lives with a wrench, maybe I can too." Those words stuck with the mechanic. They reminded him that inspiration was contagious, that by sharing his passion, he was planting seeds that might grow into something incredible someday. Despite his growing fame, the mechanic remained grounded. He continued to visit Maplewood regularly, not because he felt obligated, but because it kept him connected to the values that had guided him all along. On weekends, he'd stop by the diner for coffee, chat with old friends, and listen to their stories. Sometimes, he'd run into parents whose children now used the adaptive wheelchairs. They'd thank him again, telling him how much easier life had become since their kids gained the freedom to move independently. "You're changing the world," one father told him during one such encounter. The mechanic chuckled, scratching the back of his neck awkwardly. "I'm just doing what anyone else would do." "Maybe," the father replied. "But not everyone does." That comment stayed with him. It was true most people wouldn't go out of their way to help strangers, let alone dedicate their lives to improving the lives of others. Yet, the mechanic knew he wasn't special. He was just someone who believed in the power of kindness and saw opportunities where others might have looked away. Years passed, and the impact of his work only grew. Wheels of Hope expanded globally, reaching countries where access to assistive technology was virtually non-existent. Communities rallied together to adapt the designs to fit local needs, creating versions made from locally sourced materials that were affordable and sustainable. In villages thousands of miles away, children who once relied on makeshift crutches or crawled on the ground now zipped around in sturdy, reliable chairs. Their laughter echoed through streets that had once seemed impossibly far away. Back home, the mechanic became a beloved figure, not just in Maplewood but across the country. Schools invited him to speak at graduations, charities honored him at galas, and media outlets featured him in documentaries. Despite the accolades, he never lost sight of what mattered most. To him, success wasn't measured in awards or headlines. It was measured in smiles, in moments of joy, in lives transformed. One day, during a charity event hosted by Wheels of Hope, a journalist asked him a question he'd heard countless times before. "What drives you? What keeps you going?" The mechanic paused, thinking carefully before answering. Then, with a soft smile, he said, "It's simple, really. Every time I see a kid roll by in one of our chairs, laughing and playing like any other child, I remember why I started this. It's not about me, it's about them. If I can give someone the chance to live without limits, then every late night, every challenge, every sacrifice is worth it. The crowd erupted in applause, but the mechanic barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on a group of children nearby, racing each other in their brightly colored wheelchairs. One of them glanced up and waved at him, grinning from ear to ear. The mechanic waved back, his heart swelling with gratitude. He didn't know what the future held. There would always be more challenges to face, more lives to touch, but he knew one thing for certain. As long as there were people in need, he would keep finding ways to help. Because that's who he was. That's what he'd always been. And so, the cycle of kindness continued, fueled by a mechanic who once fixed a broken wheelchair out of the goodness of his heart. Somewhere out there, another child was receiving a chair that would change their life, and the mechanic knew he had played a part in making that possible. As the sun set over the horizon, casting a golden glow across the bustling city, the mechanic stood quietly, watching the world turn. For him, it wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about connection, compassion, and the belief that even the smallest act of kindness could spark a ripple effect, capable of transforming lives, including his own.